Okay, again, very good afternoon to you. I apologize for the late start, but as you can see, sometimes people are very carried away, so they don't know when to stop. So we just have to allow for that. But I promise you, we will also keep to our time so that we will be able to release you in due time. So thank you very much for joining us. We're excited to have you here, and hopefully you'll get the best out of the session. I'm not supposed to be doing a lot of talking, so I'm not going to talk much. We have a panel here this afternoon, and I'm probably going to give them most of the airtime that they deserve and need to actually communicate what needs to be communicated. But very briefly, this session is the Smart Mobility session, in case some of you are not aware of it. And the topic is Smart Mobility Research, Development, and Innovation for a Capable State. Now, I'm going to give an opportunity to the panel to quickly introduce themselves and tell you where they are from. So let me start with myself. My name is Kenny Kiston. I'm the Executive Cluster Manager for a cluster called Smart Mobility in the CSIR. We have a panel here assembled that will be able to quickly introduce themselves. I will then go to tell you what the problem statement is and what we want to solve today. I will then defer to them to give me 3 to 5 minutes on their view. There are some questions that I've asked them to provide me with so that we can zero in focus. And I want to give you, the audience, an opportunity for you to actually ask some questions. Is that fine with you? I think it's important for you. But I want to also state right at the outset, like I briefed the panel this afternoon just before we started, we are not going to talk about problems. We know what they are. If you're sitting here and if you don't know what the problems are besetting the transport sector and the state, capability of the state, then we have a problem. What that problem? I want to spend quality time focusing on the solutions. I want to focus quality time saying, what do we do? How do we do it? And what needs to be done? That's the crux of the session today. So if you came here to listen about all the stories, then you'd rather go and watch ENCA, SABC TV, you'll hear the whole story. We want to focus on what needs to be done, and that's the mindset I want to create and so on. So with that in mind, let me start immediately with the lady on my right. Maria, over to you.
Okay, Anne-Marie Lubbe. I'm from Passenger Rail Agency of South Africa, and I'm responsible for strategy and business performance as well as research in PRASA.
Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Vishaal Lutchman. I am currently the Managing Director of Transportation at Zutari, providing advisory and professional engineering services to clients on the continent.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Khangwelo Muronga. I'm a research group leader for transport infrastructure management, which is under Smart Mobility, where Ken is our director. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My apologies for my husky voice. I lost it this morning. Don't know where, somewhere on the plane, I think. My name is Marianne Vanderschuren. I'm a professor at the University of Cape Town. I hold a smart mobility chair there that is funded by the CSIR together with the NRF. And I'm also this year the SARChI, South African Institute for Civil Engineering president.
Thank you, Prof. Marianne. So, colleagues, I must also right at the outset indicate that we've extended an invitation to some other parties, but they've failed to show up. We've asked SATAU, the South African Transport and Allied Workers Union, to join us, a representative. We've not heard from them. We've also asked a representative from Santaco to join us, and they're not with us because I think they're an important constituency in this discussion. And there was someone from Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport that also ought to have been here, but they unfortunately then they have not joined us. So I just want to put that on the record. Now, as I was saying to the panel sometime today, and I want to sketch the picture for you so that you get a sense. What we are talking about today, and if I get to create a theoretical construct, there's 3 parts to this discussion that we're going to have this morning. There is this whole grouping that we call labor, okay? The unions, if you want to call them, but organized labor in this country. And that's why we extended the invitation to SATAU. There's this whole issue of the transport sector in all its aspects and components that we are dealing with. And there is the issue of the state. So there's 3 parties involved in the discussion that we want to address today. 3 of them. I'm just painting that construct. If I had a board here, I would have actually drawn the construct for you. At the end of this conversation, we need to merge those 3 parties together. And part of the process of merging is to understand what are the issues? Why is there so much distrust, mistrust between the parties? Why can they not come together and put their heads together and work? Now, in order for me to do this, let me read you a few things. Firstly, let's talk about the state. Quite often, there's various observations made by various political parties, various groupings in the country that speak of a failing state. Some people say we've already a failed state. I'm going to leave you, the audience, to make up your mind what you think about that. But let me read something to you. This is a piece that I picked up from something about 2 years ago. It was articulated in a document called the Conversation. And the author says, a major factor that undermines South Africa's social and economic progress is the deficit in the capabilities of the state. The gap was identified long ago by the National Planning Commission, first in its diagnostic report in 2010, and again when it issued its final National Development Plan. Okay? And the plan is the country's blueprint for fixing the problems. Undoubtedly, that is true, and we are aware of that. Now, what is the definition of a failed state? This is the view from this author. We define a capable state as a system of governance, okay, that functions with relative autonomy from narrow ideological interests, important word, okay, because that's exactly what it is. And then it goes on to say that it parts or it spells out with a constitutional mandate, and it's supposed to work in a coordinated manner to achieve clearly defined goals, okay, to contract, to work efficiently and effectively to deliver services and critical economic function. Infrastructure. That's the purpose of the state, and that is what a state is supposed to do. A functioning, well-run state, a capable state, if you want to call it. Now, the core function of the state is to mobilize resources to meet its developmental challenges and to manage long-term social and economic change. A capable state with autonomy from political factions is best placed to respond to changes and harness opportunities for development. Let me pause there. I'm not going to talk about the political factions and politicize the discussion. Now, let me quickly take you to something that I found that was printed or set out by the World Bank just a couple of days or a week or so ago. So the World Bank reports that a country's growth of infrastructure and the GDP is directly linked to the public transport and public transport infrastructure in the country. And it goes on to say, and this is just a couple of days ago, it says Africa is urbanizing faster than any other continent at a rate of almost 6% every year compared to the global average of 2%. So clearly you can see what's happening in South Africa, you can see what's happening in Africa on the continent in terms of what the World Bank is saying in terms of urbanization and growth in transport. Now, if you think back to the construct I mentioned to you, the labor, we have the state, and we have the transport sector. Now we want to focus and say, what are the key challenges? What are the key problems? What is it that we need to do? Now note, I said to you, we know the problems. If you don't know the problems, then we have a problem. So let's look at what needs to be done to improve the capability of the state, because the CSIR's conference and themes, and if you listen carefully to our CEO this morning in his interview, as well as in his the report by the minister, what do we need to do to modernize the South African economy, particularly looking at the sectors and transport in specific, which has the most potential to contribute to economic growth, such as transport. And that is what we want to do. And that's what the focus of the CSR is. So let me start with my panelists. And the first person that I would like to start with is Vishaal. And I want him to quickly give us his view and his comment. The 3 to 5 minutes starts now. And each of the panelists will have 3 to 5 minutes on their take on the subject. Vishaal?
Thank you. Thank you. I think when I was asked to sit here, I had to, and applied my mind to what you'd call a capable state. For me, a capable state is when we live every day and we don't actually know who runs the country. The fact that we know every day what is happening tells you that there's a problem. Because when things work, you don't notice. And that's my simple reality of understanding how government should work. And simply put, using an academic mindset, is that every organ of state is legislated by some act of parliament, which is very clear in its mandate in terms of what you need to do. So if you are not doing that, you are not performing in terms of your mandate, and then we talk about problems and all of the things that come as a result. So honoring the mandate and understanding what each of those mandates are requires us to do our work every day towards that mandate. And I think for many years, we were actually doing that. But somewhere along the line, we lost our path and we forgot about this mandate. And it became a different discussion in terms of what the function of the state is. And then we started to talk about structural reforms and all of these things, because now we're trying to say, let's go back and fix something. And I'm talking very broadly, and it's not an indictment on any person that works in the state, because I also worked as well. So I understand the challenges that one has when you work in government, because it's hugely bureaucratic. So when that system fails, then in that process of failing, it has a huge socio-economic impact, because many of the mandates or organs of state have a social mandate attached to the functioning of that organ. Okay, so what has happened, and why it's a double whammy for us, is because we inherited an unequal society, and we spent so much of time trying to fix that inequality that we forgot about what I would call the top line. The top line is where we need to now start to reinvest, become a little bit more of a capitalist mindset, and we didn't do that. And that's why we're sitting now with coffers that are empty, but yet we are progressing very strongly still on our social mandate. And that is, and in that mechanism of not looking at the top line, focusing a lot on the bottom line, we lost the ability to function. If I look at a proper normal P&L for a business, we are not functioning anymore. So I think, in my opinion, that has to be fixed. And it's a lot to do with people. It has a lot to do with values and things like that, and professionalism and skills and all of these things, but it amounts to people in the end. So I'll leave it there for now, Ken. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Vishaal. That's great stuff. So we need to go back to visit the issue of the mandate of the government. And obviously, it's quite clear in this particular sector, and the discussion today is the mandate is to provide safe, efficient transportation systems for the citizens of this country. Whatever format we find it, that's the mandate of the state. And we need to look more specifically to say which organs of state are actually fulfilled or tasked with driving that process in the country. So, Prof. Marianne, can I switch over to you? And the issues that you raised were around what does smart public transport mean? Does big data play a part in the improvement of public transport? What is the move? What are the implications of mobility in South Africa at the moment? So let's hear your views, 3 to 5 minutes.
So let me start with actually agreeing with what Vishaal is saying. We don't know what the mandate is. So if I go back to the numbers, and as an academic, I always crunch the numbers. In the latest National Household Travel Survey, 73% of our people walk and use public transport. We need to remember that when they use public transport, they also walk. They need to get to the station, the stop, the minibus taxi rank, etc., etc. We don't have safe walking environments, and we don't have optimally functioning public transport. And that results, and you talked about safe, in, for example, 40% of our fatalities being pedestrians. That's the state of our nation that we have created. I think if we focus on what is needed in public transport, we need to make sure that we understand, and I think that understanding is needed by the state, by the users, by the providers of public transport systems and by the laborers, the drivers, etc., of what an integrated system actually means. So the type of competition that we see on our roads between bus and minibus taxis and rail, etc., is actually not conducive and not efficient. So I do think we need to make sure that we identify what the demand for transport is. And if it's very high, we need rail systems that are efficient. If it's a little bit less high, we need bus systems, maybe BRT systems, maybe more traditional bus systems. And minibus taxis should be the feeders of that system. And we have seen in some of the pilots that if we integrate the system in that manner, that working conditions improve, that the services to people improve, that the profit margins improve. So there is a win-win-win. We just need to start understanding what that actually means an integrated system. Maybe I'll leave it there, not to take too much time of that 3 to 5 minutes, and we can come back to some of the other issues that you spoke about.
All right, great. Thank you, Prof. I appreciate that. So there is an issue around saying, and it resurrects the debate around rail to road, and to say, what is it as a country we need to be doing, both from national, provincial, as well as local authority level, the metros and stuff. Now, there's a lot of work being done by various metros in the country. If I take Gauteng as an example, there is a move now towards integrated transport and ticketing systems. And the CSIR is quite extensively involved in that kind of work in terms of understanding what the challenges are and how to look at seamless transportation system in plain, simple language. If a person gets off the Gautrain bus, he must be able to get onto the Ria Vaya bus. He must be able to take a taxi using one ticket so that he's able to move seamlessly across all modes of transport. And I think that's very progressive thinking. Part of the process is around creating the transport authorities. If you look at the eThekwini, they have a similar kind of system in place. The eThekwini Transport Authority also trying to move. So wouldn't you say then part of the issue and the problem is this dysfunctional, disintegrated system of transportation? But we will come back to that, and I'll give you a chance to respond to that in a minute. Let me just go back to the lady on my right, Anna Maria. Just give us your views, because you raised some issues around what are the gates that we have to manage. How do we ensure that we do not see the future in a siloed transport entity? And what do you think we ought to do to look at sustainable transport in the future? What's your take on that?
I think this originates very much with the article that I recently picked up. Is we tend to make decisions in a short-term focus. And it comes back to psychological issues, to say that when I make a decision on that basis, I tend to be not that rational. And to get to a long path decision making, you possibly rather need to start thinking is how must the system look in the future, and then come back and say what are the gates that I need to try and change so that I can get to the future. And for me is if we need to keep in mind that a transport system can be there without a passenger. And a passenger do need a transport system to be able to travel, but we can create a transport system that is not useful for anybody either. So it is very important that whatever we do, it must meet the needs of the user of that system. And to some extent for me is if you have the same goal, then it should assist that at least government and the transport operators and the unions can have a better working relationship. But it also needs a growing economy. And I think if you have a growing economy, you will reduce the strife between the three actors. At the moment, we do not have that growing economy. We're very much focused on competition between the modes rather than an integrated approach. And definitely you need to say each mode needs to play to its strengths. I come from the rail industry, so we need lots of volumes. So there is also for me the silo thing is you cannot plan rail, especially if you do not consider spatial development. Because we cannot go like we're developing new townships where it's a little small stand and it's very dispersed. We actually want high-rise buildings. But you also need to balance that with what is the socio-economic conditions. So I think it comes back to, in the end, how do we satisfy the needs of the users? And maybe at this stage, we also need to start thinking, and that is maybe where research come in, what is going to be the needs of the young ones of today? Because in a lot of infrastructure, roads, rail, you construct that infrastructure for what, for 50 years? It's seldom less than that in any case. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna Maria. So you raise a couple of interesting issues and points that we actually need to come back to. One of the key points is the, even if I have to rephrase it and put it in my own words, is the in-transitions of the taxi. I'm now speaking specifically of the taxi industry, because obviously they carry 67% of the population in this country, if not more. My last count, if I had to go by the last count. And part of the problem is this competitiveness that we see constantly manifesting itself around taxi routes and fare collection and all of those things. I mean, one of the biggest challenges is their resistance to actually use a smart card system. Still insist on wanting to follow the old system of cash and so on. But those are important issues, and we will come back to them hopefully if time permits us. And now let me just go to the last speaker on our panel, and I think a lot of us know him quite well. Is Mr. Khangwelo Muronga. He's a senior researcher at the Transport Systems and Operations in the CSIR. So Khangwelo, let's hear from you quickly. I don't have a set of questions to actually pose to you, but he's been working quite extensively with Gauteng Department of Roads and Transport on a number of key challenges that the department has experienced in the past couple of years. So perhaps maybe you can focus on what are the solutions we're putting on the table to address some of those challenges. Khangwelo?
Okay, thank you. And I think my discussion will start with some few statements, and in agreement to the colleagues what they've said. This year during the Southern African Transport Conference, we had a breakaway with the taxi industry in terms of the minibus taxis. And one of the reasons was, why don't you want to use the one ticket for all and so on? And they said to us, there is nothing for us without us. And I said to them, what about the commuters? They said, who are the commuters? So you can see there already, there is a problem. And we are trying to look at that to provide the solutions at the CSIR. And obviously we have to do this research. We have to go through surveys to understand the commuter, what their needs are, to understand what is the needs of the industry, what are the needs of government. But what it's a serious issue is that we are no longer in a position where we implement things for someone without including that person on the implementation of those things. To get commuters into the trains, we need to talk to the commuters. To get them into the minibus taxis, we need to talk to them and understand it. Funny enough is that part of the research we do, currently we publish the COVID-19 household travel survey for Gauteng. With the one that was mentioned, the commuters said 85% of the time they will choose the minibus taxis, because you can hail it anywhere you want and it can get you wherever you want very fast. So they were interested in the speed. This time when we talked to them, they said, no, it's no longer safe. We are not going to use it anymore. Now we want a safer system. And you can see the needs changes, and we need to keep up with what they need. I think I'll stop it there for now, and you can help us address those issues. Do we satisfy the industry because there's nothing for them without them? They don't even know who the commuter is. Or do we satisfy the commuters, or government keeps on ticking a box because they have a mandate? Thanks.
Okay, thank you for those comments, Khangwelo. Quite an eye-opener. So colleagues, let me pose a question to you. How many of you in this room today have actually used a minibus taxi? Not today, at some stage. Not today. All right, so quite a number of you. I've also used a minibus taxi. And the reason why I'm asking this is, can you identify with the commuter out there? Can you understand what they go through every day? Can you understand the pain? Can you understand the trauma that they experience on a day-to-day basis? Because some commuters, in case you don't know it, and some of you only wake up at 6, I'm assuming, some of them are up at 4 in the morning, if not earlier, to get to the bus stop or station or whatever we call it at 5 a.m., to take a Patco bus, to travel a long distance to get their places of employment, to reach there on time for the employer. And in the afternoon, some of the mothers, they only leave some of the places of employment at 5. They only get home at 8, 9, and then they start their chores and their cooking. I'm painting that scenario because I want you to also get a sense and feel the pain and understand what the commuters in this country, according to the reports that I read, 60-70% of them rely on public transport, exacerbated by the fact that the cost of fuel is increasing. And to follow up on Khangwelo's comment, the taxi guys are not even interested on their commute. All they're interested in is their finances. So understand the picture that is emerging in terms of saying, this is the situation that is existing currently now. I'm not talking about 20 years ago. I'm talking about like now, like yesterday, like last week. That's the reality of the situation. So we need to ask ourselves, and I come back to what I've said right at the outset when I put the premise to you, what do we need to do to fix it? What do we need to do to address the situation? What kind of solutions? We have representative from industry here. We have representative from government here. The National Department of Transport is here with us. We have the CSIR here, who prides itself on finding technological innovation and solutions to solve some of the problems. Let's now start putting our heads together and say, what is it that we need to do? I'm going to allow 3-4 minutes for that before now I give you the opportunity, like I promised, to ask the questions of this panel, because they are here for you. Okay, so let me start with Marianne, Prof. What do you think? And what's your view?
So I do think we need to find the win-wins. And if I can come back to your electronic ticketing system, there is crime in this country where drivers, operators, passengers, etc., all have experiences of crime and their cash being stolen. That could be controlled with technology. I think one of the big wins that are there, and I think for government and operators, is that if we have electronic information, we can assess exactly what the demand is, where the demand is, how many people on each corridor, what their origin and destination is in detail. That's a really rich big data database that can then help to improve the supply. And again, the supply comes with operating profits, better services to the user, etc. So I do think we need to communicate the multiple opportunities that electronic ticketing has and make sure that we find the wins for all stakeholders so that we actually can sell the idea.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I think that's very useful comments and inputs. So Vishaal, what from an industry perspective and working across the sector, what do you think would be the most appropriate solutions and the quick wins that we can actually implement like almost immediately? When I say immediately, it might take 2, 3, 4 months, but something that is sustainable, something that will actually assist the industry in addressing these challenges, not only in the taxi industry, but across the whole sector, the transport sector.
I've spent a lot of time reflecting on that question, not just because you asked that, because I feel quite strongly about having an answer to that. I think in my perspective, what's very easy that can actually start today is that if each one of us decides that we actually care about what's happening to the people that you spoke of. We have a very separate economy. I call it the have and have not. Some people say first and second. But that's the connection where it's not meeting. In fact, it's getting further with time. And I think what I can do and what all of us could do very quickly is to start to relate to that phenomenon. Because many of us sit here, but we don't lose sleep over a homeless person that doesn't have a home. So is it really in our interest to care about it? Because it doesn't affect you. And once you start appreciating what people are going through and start to care about fixing something for someone else, which doesn't bring necessarily an immediate financial benefit to yourself, we're starting to fix a problem. Because what happens there, it allows me to have a conversation with another person that actually cares. And that allows private sector to start talking to government and government to start talking to the private sector. Social compacting is one of the things I still believe can work, but with the right mindset. Second thing is, leadership is very easy to fix. It doesn't cost anything. If leaders on both sides, and I'm not critical of public sector or private sector, I think it takes two hands to cause corruption and malfeasance, which is the elephant in the room. But if we stop that and we make a conscious decision that we're going to work in the interest of the mandate, work in the interest of our organizational KPIs in terms of what are we doing. We all know what they are, by the way. So stop the other stuff, is what I would say, is cheap and free to do. So if our president wants to call something to order, I would appreciate if he does. But I personally haven't seen that. So in my mind, that is something that can be done. I think all of us are waiting and looking for leadership and longing for it when we see things going wrong and we don't find it. That doesn't cost money to fix. So that can be an immediate change in mindsets of people. So that's it, what we talk about, a leadership vacuum. Okay? Money will come once we fix that, because it's on the back of trust that investors will put money into this economy. For now, it's not coming because there's so much of leakage. And if you've got so much of leakage, no one will put their money in there, because money is a global commodity. Why must I put my money into a transport system when I can put it into a bank where it's safe and secure? I'd rather do that, and a lot of money is sitting in banks, by the way, because it's not being deployed into infrastructure. Money is not a shortage whatsoever. So anyone who says that money is a shortage is also not understanding the problem, because it's not attracted to the investment that we talk about. Another simple thing is connecting on the mandates. A lot of the government, if I superimpose a business structure on a government structure, it's very similar if you think about it, because it's various silos that need to work, but they need to work together. Because a lot of the complexities we sit with right now don't require and cannot work with just one government department. Transport department cannot fix the taxi industry alone. Okay? There's multiple stakeholders. But when I look at the transport department, they don't talk to each other even. If I talk at national, province, and metros, there's no integrated conversation that's happening. On top of that, there's intentional, almost I would say sabotaging, of the conversation, because there's so many agendas that are divergent, we have no hope of converging. So if we start to give, in other words, I don't feel that strong about my belief, and I appreciate yours, we have a better chance of converging on what should be done. For now, we don't have that convergence, because we're so busy fighting and digging our heels in for whatever the reasons are, and agendas are many. But if we dispel those things, and say what is in the interest of the people we serve, it becomes easy to converge. Because then it's not about me. It's about what is the purpose of doing what we are doing. And often, the people that we serve are not in the room participating in that conversation. Okay? I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you, Vishaal, for that. If I have to take the liberty of summarizing the essence of what you're saying, you spoke to the issue of the constitutional mandate of the National Department of Transport, possibly the provincial metros. We spoke about the fraud and corruption that is pervasive across the system, which we know about, like I mentioned before. Spoke about the private sector involvement in this. And I think most important of all the issues that you raised for me is the issue around the political will to drive what needs to be done across the entire sector, so that we ensure that we provide that safe, reliable, efficient transportation system that is so desperately needed in all parts of the country, if I've captured the essence of what you say. But let me now go over to you, Anna Maria. What's your view around saying, these are the challenges that are bedeviling us? What role should the state play around improving the capacity and capability to address some of these issues?
Okay, it's maybe not the easiest question to answer. Actually, I think we should be able to allow, and it's very much my private view, much more private sector participation. And maybe for me, the issue is that the current state that we are, there's extreme political interference in state organizations. It is not run on a business principles, the decisions doesn't get made, and everybody pushes it up and then it just comes down again. So part of that capacity creation is to bring in the private sector to assist with a lot of it. And I think we want to do too many things ourselves. Maybe even if you talk about SIA or any of those, there is other people that can do it better. And my personal view is it's better to let the economy grow than to worry too much about who's the owner of that asset necessarily. So the creation of the capacity, I think there is a lot of capacity, but you need to appoint the right people at the right places, and very much to have people that are knowledgeable, and especially in some of the transport areas, you need stability. You cannot, where you develop an organization that is investing for 50 years, you cannot every 5 years have a change in where we want to go.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I think you raise a very important point, and the issue of continuity. We see it right now as we grapple with some of the challenges and issues. One of the things that has been perplexing me, and I've been chatting to some colleagues around this, if you take a look at Gauteng now, there's a change in the leadership, the political leadership with a new premier. And we would have thought that the existing MEC for transport would stay because of continuity. But all of a sudden, there's a new MEC, and now it's as if you're pushing the needle back to start again. And then the challenge is in 18 months' time, we're going to elections, and we have another problem again. So the political issue, I don't know what the answer is and how we can get away. But let me go to Khangwelo, last comment around saying you've had experience in working with Gauteng, the Department of now Transport and Logistics. Apart from the taxi issue, what do you think are some of the burning issues, and what do you think we ought to be doing then?
Thanks. I think I will take this one to more of technology. For those who flew to Johannesburg or to Gauteng for this conference, you might have realized when you were booking your flights, they will ask you a question: do you want a car rental? Do you want a hotel? This is where you can go eat. They even give you restaurants. But when it comes to other transport modes, whether I'm in a Gautrain or Prasa Rail train or I'm in a taxi, I don't know what's going on where I'm going. I just pray and hope it's raining, and where I'm going, they'll drop me where there's a shelter. We don't have that information. So I think we need to start talking to each other. In terms of Prasa, needs to talk to the bus industry, needs to talk to the minibus taxi industry, needs to talk to government about the facilities. And that information must end up with the commuters, so that as a commuter, I know what's happening where I'm going and how to plan it. And even go further and be able to tell me how much it will cost me to do all those things. When you're booking your flight ticket, by the end of those steps I've mentioned, they give you a cost of this is how much everything will cost. If you have the budget, you click accept and confirm, and your ticket is printed out, and then you know everything is booked. Why can't we do that when we are booking or we are planning to commute? Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. That's very, very relevant and to the point. Very interestingly enough, if some of you were here earlier this morning, you would have seen there was an interview by CNBC with our CEO, as well as the Deputy CEO of the National Research Foundation. And part of the issue was, what is the involvement of the private sector in technology, in innovation, and also in finding solutions to solve the problems in this country? And the question revolved around saying, where is the private sector in all of this? What is their role that they play, and how can we bring them on board, and what it is that we need to do? But let's pause there for a moment. I'm just watching time, colleagues, and time has just really flown by so quickly. So I want to now open this conversation up to you, the audience, and give you a chance if there are questions, comments, remarks. So if you can just quickly raise your hand, Sholofelo will give you the mic. Oh, all right. Okay, I see one hand here. Louis, any other hands quickly? Okay, Mr. Temba Tenza. All right, go for it, Louis. And tell me who you're directing the question to, the entire panel or someone?
Hi, first of all, I'm Louis. I'm working for the JRA, and we are currently busy with an intelligent transport strategy for the next 5 years. So this to me is very interesting. I want to make a comment when it comes to the taxi industry, because I think transporting people with a taxi is very effective. Study done in the one of the universities in Amsterdam actually showed that the size of the vehicle and the volume of the people, it actually is actually the best, let's say, fit for purpose. So South Africa has naturally progressed into a situation where we've got taxis and it's very effective. Unfortunately, I think we have to get to who is the stakeholders. Who owns the taxis? Who's the stakeholders? Because my feeling is that the true stakeholder is actually the user of the taxi. It's the person getting into that taxi and then being driven, right? And that person should be treated as a valuable asset to the industry. Then safety, right, will automatically be resolved. Then stopping in areas which is not designated, where it's unsafe, will be looked at. We are constantly sitting with mobility problems within the CBD of Joburg, where taxis stop in the middle of an intersection. Then I'm not talking about one, about 4 or 5, and they physically block the whole intersection. The problem is that the Metro Police is actually they are there. They are deployed throughout the whole city every morning, right? And nothing gets done. The taxis don't get redirected. So my question is, who is the stakeholders? Who's the beneficiaries of where the money goes, right? And can attention not be given to the true stakeholder, which is the user of the taxi? Thank you.
Anyone would like to comment on that? Marianne?
Yeah, I think it's something that Anna Marie also said, that it's about the users and providing a service for them. So I agree with you, but there are many more stakeholders. And I think that's where the problem comes in. And I think we forget, when we see a problem and you say the police is out there every single morning, but isn't doing anything or isn't doing enough, we're not looking at what are other options. You know, I'm a transport engineer. If I would come and look at those intersections, I could find the problem and I could give you quite a few solutions. There's always multiple solutions. So I think the one problem that we have in this country is that we carry on doing the same thing over and over and expect a different result. It's not going to change. So we need to start re-looking at the issues. Yes, there are challenges. We're not going to talk about it. We were instructed not to talk about it. But we cannot think that if we carry on doing the same thing over and over, that things will change. So that's why I said, let's find the win-wins. But let's find the opportunities. Let's find the 20 different solutions that we can find for your intersection or for your whole network, and then work through what is the best option. You know, and yes, a minibus taxi is fit for purpose, but only in certain areas for certain demands. In Cape Town, that had the highest rail users in the past, for every train that is not going on the central line in the morning peak, I have more than 100 overloaded taxis on my road. That's not efficient for anybody. Thank you.
No, thank you, Marianne. Just before we get to Themba Tenza, so Louis, I hope that gives you a sense. Now, we're not saying every problem at every intersection will be solved by bringing a transport engineer. Okay, because if it was as easy as that, it would be. But there's another part to this thing, and that is called driver behavior and the education around that. And fortunately, we have one of my staff members here, Dr. Karin Fente, that's busy driving this whole issue of driver behavior and, you know, all of those aspects associated with that. And perhaps she may even give us a comment a little later on. But Themba, over to you.
Good afternoon, Chair and panelists and everybody. Thank you very much. I am Themba Tenza from the National Department of Transport. I work mainly in research and innovation. It sounds like a big word, but I'm just an employee of the state. My comment, I have many comments, but one that I thought I should share right now, it is directed especially to, I didn't get the name very well. I'm a bit hard of hearing, but my gentleman here on the mandate of the state. It's a comment, and I would be happy if anyone wants to comment further or even later outside. For a long time, we have been doing very well in producing policy papers. But increasingly now, we are finding it almost frustrating to have such a great success in producing policy papers, but being unable to see them being implemented. The political and state mandate of the National Department of Transport stops at making policy, never at implementing. Meanwhile, all the problems or the things we talk about here are about implementation of policy. So that gray space, that gray area between what we really have to do and we are mandated to do, and we have perfected ourselves into doing it and aligned even our structures to making policies, frustrates us when we just step out once to talk about the policy and we find that even previous policies were never really implemented properly. So my comment here, or my request here, is that if there is any comment as to how it can be done to assist, because the people who write the policies will have researched and so on, but they are not the best ones to implement. So we need this space between the that's why we separated and have agencies of the Department of Transport, like PRASA, like SANRAL, like many others. That was a solution that was started, but obviously it's not enough. And then, if you allow me, Chair, then the last one is exactly what we've talked about. Not everything will be solved by one kind of profession. It's the soft issues. We are a very differentiated society, and we are a very, unfortunately, divided society as well. So for transport authorities and pockets, you need an academic approach at first to describe maybe what is successful in one town will not be successful in another town. I think that's the approach, but it's just a comment. I'm not saying it's the only way. But on the mandate, I agree. The mandate is difficult. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tenza. Would you want to respond, Vishaal? You can use this.
Yeah, thanks. I think when it comes to the policy and that you mentioned, I think it's world class, to be honest with you. I think it is so far in the future that we might have missed today. That's my sense, because it's not easy to articulate it in the current circumstances. It's as if the policy fits a very much more mature society. And I'll maybe use one of the policies perhaps as case in point. When you published the ports policy, it was 2006, if I'm not mistaken. Now that gave rise to the Port Authority and it should be corporatized, but it didn't happen. So I think between the Department of Transport and the public enterprises, at that point, there was dissension, which should have been called to order. Had that happened, we would not be sitting with the ports issues that we're sitting with today, because it would have been corporatized. It would have went through the process of securing terminal operators like it should have, and public sector would have been involved more than 15 years ago. That's the case in point where policy is perhaps too advanced, and the reasoning for why it wasn't implemented also makes sense. That's the sad reality. So you can't go back and blame DOT or public enterprises. It was as if the policy was ahead of its time. Now we're sitting with issues on the ground that the policy can't fix because it's not for the right time. That's one of the comments I would make in response to what you've just mentioned.
Okay, thank you, Vishaal. So the issue is not around the policy regime. The legislative mandate of the department to come up with these policies, and I have to be careful what I say here because the CSIR has also been involved in a lot of the development of the policies. Way back when we started the Moving South Africa, MSA, the NLTTA, the RIFSA, NatMap, so we're part of it. Guilty as charged. There's no issue with the policy. I think the problem is with the implementation and the agencies that are falling under the ambit and control of the department to implement the policies, and this is where the problem is. I mean, I don't want to mention them, but if I had to just say RTMC, you know what I'm talking about. So we don't want to even go there. But I mean, that's where the rub is. There's always going to be, I must be careful, I don't get ahead of myself. There's always this problem in South Africa. We have the most beautiful, the most extensive, the most high-tech policies in the world. You can compare world class. So we're very good at putting all these things in theory. But when it comes to the doing part, we fail miserably. We're the worst in the world. So there's a huge chasm between the policy. I mean, the same, starting with the president, right down, the same story. We're so good at making wonderful speeches. We're so good at saying, if I look at just the GBV, we've been saying for how many years it needs to be sorted out. Has it been sorted out? No. Why? We're not implementing things. And I think the problem is there's always going to be that chasm. And that's what we need to fix in this country and amongst ourselves. Colleagues, I'm just watching time and we almost run out of time. Are there any other burning questions? I want to give the audience an opportunity and a chance. Are there anyone else that has a question that they would like to ask? Don't say I didn't give you a chance. There's a lady here and there's a lady there.
Thank you. My name is Ebile Ntombela from the Department of Environmental Affairs. I just have a question around the fact that aren't we trying to improve the efficiency of the public transport system that supports a very inefficient design of our spatial or of our urban areas? So should we not be having conversations as transport engineers with town and regional planners? Because the current spatial planning in this country is just a mess, and every effort to try and improve a transport system for a spatial planning system that is a mess, I don't think is going to succeed. That's just my personal opinion.
Okay. Anyone want to respond to that? Here we go.
I think you're really spot on. And I think it goes back to the previous topic as well. We tend to work, Vishaal has also said, the government from the top to the local level is not talking, but departments across each other is also not talking. We create policies that has repercussions in other industries. So, and it comes back to a systems view of things. You need to think about what's the consequences of what I'm doing. And I really feel that given that we've had COVID, given that we have to change some of our infrastructure, we really need to come up with smart cities And smart cities should cater for smart mobility as well. But yes, but our plans are wrong. And you find the spatial societies creating townships away from working opportunities. And you still don't go for high-rise buildings. Although my husband recently said, but remember, somebody that doesn't have money cannot stay in a flat. What do they do if they don't have electricity? They normally make a fire. You can't do that in a flat. But for that, you need economic growth. But we need to work together. So it is getting out of this silo mentality that I'm only working for transport, I'm only working for environmental affairs. You need to think wider than that.
No, thank you for that, Anna Maria. I think all of us here ought to be aware of the inequalities and the whole issue of the spatial disparities that we have in this country. If I may be so bold to say, I mean, even if you look at the BRT, it's failed completely. It's missed the mark. Instead of bringing people from the township to the cities, we're running the BRT in the cities. It just doesn't make sense. Your mind boggles around those kinds of things. All right, I saw there's one more question here.
Yes.
Sorry, you want to respond, Marianne?
Yeah, I was going to, because if we're not careful, we fall in the same trap as we have just spoken about with regards to policies. Although I agree that the environment and planning is at the core of the problem, we're not going to change that in a day. You know, it has been built for decades. It will last for decades. And we need to identify what can we do in the short term to make improvements, and making sure that we don't add to the spatial issues that we have created in the past.
Agreed, 100%. Ma'am, over to you.
Yes, thank you. I am Mashudu Ratogwa from CSIR Smart Mobility. I think I just want to comment on the gap between the policies and the implementation, and that's some of the work that we actually working on, using models to actually figure out how we bridge those gaps. But I wrote a few things down here, just brainstorming a few things, and also taking from what the speaker said. When we now have these policies that are decorated, they are nice to look at on paper. Maybe going back and actually investigating who is supposed to then push this policies, and are they capable? Do they have enough skills and capability? And that is something that we could look at. And also, the gentleman over there, I think is Vishaal, he spoke about us actually caring about the main stakeholder. I think also going from that, and not only caring about the person, but also putting ourselves in the user's point of view. Because now checking everybody who came to this conference, we're talking about public transportation, but how many of us actually used public transportation to come here? And actually also seeing, are we experiencing, are we taking time to leave our cars and actually go to this public transportation to actually experience what these people are experiencing, so that now when we now draw our policies and we do research, we actually are actually connected to the people that we're actually designing for. Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I'm not sure, Vishaal, you want to comment?
Yeah, thanks. I think it's one part of a solution. Simply put, if I have to summarize, because I think we're coming to the end, SDG 11 tells you very clearly what sustainable communities. It's just a guide, but it needs to be customized, I think, for the South African context. But if you look at the constructs of that goal, which in my mind should be the driving goal of everything that we do, which is to achieve sustainability in communities, the Integrated Urban Development Framework Plan, if anyone reads it, you will find that it's disconnected from the goals. It is old. It doesn't make sense when it makes statements like formalizing informal communities. I don't understand why we would want to do that. It's in the plan. That's our sustainability objective, by the way, on how South Africa plans to achieve sustainability. It's on the back of the Integrated Urban Development Framework Plan. And that, in my mind, needs to be completely rewritten. Because when I read it, it doesn't work. It means we are trying to formalize what we have right now. And that's the first mistake. The paradigm has to change. Because it's already so fundamentally flawed. How can we look to embed that further? We will not achieve sustainability in communities. We can see it very clearly right now. So those disconnects have to be connected. And we need to do what is necessary to fix that. And that we can do again for free.
Okay, thank you, Vishaal. Colleagues, if there's no further questions, okay, we have one more here from Mr. Rasinga, Dr. Rasinga.
Oh, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you for the promotion.
I like the doctor part. It's the promotion. Yeah, my name is Resanga Chauk and I'm with Smart Mobility at CSIR. I'm thinking that maybe, I think the problems are vast. And maybe the solution is to look at integrating public transport in South Africa. Anna Mary talked about the fact that each mode need to play to its strength. If the public transport system is integrated, each mode will be able to play to its strength. Where, for example, your minibus taxis will be the feeders into the other modes. I happen to live in a country where I used to use public transport to go to work and to go to everywhere. If you go partying at night, you will actually use a bus. You will have a bus at 4 o'clock in the morning. So maybe one of the solutions that we need to do in this country is to make public transport attractive for people to use. We don't have incentive to use public transport. When you start working, your first salary, your first month, you buy a car. In other countries, there's no need for you to own a car. I had a car where I lived, but I actually used it as and when I had to use public transport. So we need to look at making public transport attractive so that people can forget about their cars and get into public transport. But also we need to look into the issue of investing into public transport. Why do people not use rail? So maybe we need to look into that. How do we make sure that people are able to use the rail and get that comfort that we used to get before? I'm actually going through a course at MIT. I wanted to respond to the question of the spatial planning. And interestingly enough, the issues that we face in South Africa, they also face them in other countries, like in the US, other cities, where you find that public transport is used more in the city centers where there's high density. But when you move out, public transport is not used much. People use cars. So that happens everywhere.
Okay, thank you, Rasinga, for that. Yeah, it raises various other questions. There's so many things that we could actually talk about this afternoon, which we've actually, the issue of public transport being attractive is one thing. I think people will look at the safety part. Even the taxi drivers themselves are afraid to travel past a certain time. So you can imagine the issue of commute safety is critically important. We've come to the end of this session, and I want to just thank you for being active participants. But before we actually finally close the session, I want to allow our panelists a minute or two to wrap up, bearing in mind what I've postulated and the theoretical construct that I've articulated right at the session when I opened it. So we have labor on one side, organized, disorganized, whatever you want to call them, the labor. Because if they suddenly decide to go on a strike, including the taxi guys, everything comes to a standstill. You know that. So we have that issue. We have the issue of the state. What is their role? And I'm not convinced it's only policy. I think it goes beyond that. The issues that we spoke around safety. And as I've articulated earlier on, there are in some quarters, they said the state has failed. If you talk to political commentators, they reckon we're a basket case already. Some people say we just haven't got there yet. We're a failing state. That's debatable. So there's the issue of the state, their role, what they're doing. Then there's the issue around the various entities that run public transport in our country, the transport authorities, the metros, and everybody else from Rustenburg to Cape Town, if I can use that expression. All of the authorities that are involved in providing public transport compute. And if you listen to what I said these are three constructs, three circles. Some stage we need to bring those three together to merge them into getting a common understanding around what is it that each of them ought to bring to the table to make our public transport more safe, more attractive, more reliable, more efficient. So I'm going to now defer to the panelists and just give them 2 minutes and make their closing arguments, not only around what I've stated, but around all the questions that you've heard this afternoon. So can we start with you, Prof, and come down this line?
That's fine. I think I started with my answer. I think what we need to do is for all those stakeholders, and the ones that you didn't mention was the user. So I would say labor, the state, operators, and the users. We need to identify what makes them tick and how can we create the win-win. What has not come out this afternoon that I think is one of the levers that we are having is the financial streams. And that's something that we really need to look into and start unpacking. And how can we use those levers to actually make the change that this country needs? That's the end of what I'm going to say. And I would also like to thank the CSIR for organizing this fabulous get-together panel discussion and putting this on the map. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Khangwelo, your last
thanks.
2-3 minutes, comments, remarks.
Yes. I'll be quick, but mine would be two. One would be, Prof mentioned that there are people who actually walk as their mode of transport. And in our minds, or my mind, I know I'm thinking of walking from the CSIR gate to my office. But if you go to other provinces like Mpumalanga, people walk for 20 to 30 kilometers to get to a place of work. So when we talk public transport, let's also think that way. That will be the first one. The second one is, can we talk to each other? I think we are not talking to each other at all. And that creates issues. For example, as scientists, we come up with solutions. Risenga just brought another solution here of integration. But integration for me was the reason why I stopped using Gautrain. I was tired of jumping from this to this to this to that. I said, I'm just going to drive. So let's also think of all those things. If we don't talk to the users, we'll never give the right solution. So let's talk to each other.
Okay, no, thank you for that. I think that's something CSR is doing quite well in terms of engaging, in terms of the household travel surveys and so on. Vishaal?
Thanks. I think what I'd like to part with is the opportunity that sits with us right now. We're discussing a lot of concepts, and that's important to do. But what we sit with in terms of realities related to inequality is that sub 40% of us are not employed, and more than 60% of our youth are not employed. If we change the way we think and the way we do, we can solve unemployment. And we can solve it in a sustainable way. By not doing what we're supposed to do, that just grows. And I am really afraid, because we do not have the luxury of time to play games and waste time and resources towards these concepts whilst not moving on them. Thank you.
Thank you, Vishaal. Anna Marie?
I just think from my perspective that government has a role really in addition to policy maybe is to say they need to create the environment for economic growth. A lot of our problems and inequality remains because our economy is not growing. And once that economy is growing, you will see things changing. I do believe still the security issues that we're sitting with, and you will know in our environment, it's been extremely bad for us. It also stems to a large degree for me still from economy that's not growing, people that is not working, especially youth that is not working. So that's why they'll end up in gangs, in my opinion. And really that we need to professionalize our departments and our entities We cannot every 5 years have a new view, a new way to do it. You implement a policy, or you write the policy, in 5 years there's somebody else that has to implement it. We need to professionalize our entities, that regardless of which party is at top, the policy actually stays the same. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Anna Marie. I want to now start closing the session, and by doing that, I want to firstly thank the panelists for their inputs, for their remarks, for their comments, for their words of wisdom, and for the way they've responded to the questions being asked and the way we've managed the session this afternoon. I also want to like to thank you, the audience, for being active and participating, attentive, and making this a very successful session, even if I have to say so myself. The CSIR must also be thanked. I think we've created platforms, we've created opportunities for engagement, for discussion, for robust discussion, for intellectual discussions, for providing technological solutions, and also just driving this whole issue of innovation. And I want to assure you that our doors are quite open. My office is open, my colleagues, my staff, our impact area managers, research group leaders, researchers are always available to be able to engage with you. There are solutions, there are ideas that you have, there are discussions that you want to have across a whole range of issues in the public transport domain, be it in the issue of ports, be it in road infrastructure, be it on transportation, mobility, all of it, including rail and possibly other modes of transport. We stand ready to work with you and engage with you to find the solutions that we need to improve the capability of the state. So thank you again for your time and attentiveness, and have a good day further. Safe travels. Thank you.
Before we go, there are quick announcements. And number one would be, at the end of the conference, you will receive an email with a link to do a feedback. Please use that and give us a feedback. And if you want to get all the speakers, even the others in the other rooms, there will be a link on the website. You can get it. And please go to the exhibition hall and see the exhibitors and what their exhibitions. Talking about that, tomorrow we are having another talk up there in the exhibition hall. The famous Pothole Fix GP app for Gauteng will be having those discussions. Please join us. We have received a lot of questions using the radio stations, traditional radio stations, as well as your metro stations. We would like those discussions there to be physical. We will bring you gadgets to play with so you can see how to actually report all these potholes that you have there. Even though we know the language we are speaking is road maintenance and road rehabilitation, but let's talk about the potholes tomorrow. Thank you.